In April 2026, Russia launched its largest coordinated offensive since the war began. By May, Ukraine had gained ground instead. Here's what the data actually shows. This wasn't a small operation. Russia mobilized its most experienced units, the 5th Combined Army, elements of the 29th and 36th. Nearly 200 coordinated maneuvers every single day across the entire contact line. The stated goal was clear: achieve a breakthrough before summer. The Russian Ministry of Defense reports claimed territorial advances across multiple sectors during this period. The Institute for the Study of War, using geolocated imagery and cross-reference data, published a different assessment on May 2nd. Ukraine had recaptured 116 square kilometers. But here's what makes this significant. It's not about the territory. It's about what collapsed behind the numbers. 4 structural factors that are compounding in ways Moscow appears unable to reverse. Let me show you the pattern. Across every sector, Pokrovsk, Kostiantynivka, Huliaipol, and Orikhiv, the same sequence repeated. First, Ukrainian drones identified weak Russian control points. Then assault groups infiltrated under drone cover. Robotic systems cleared the positions. Then Ukraine held them. Russia had taken most of these areas using the exact same tactic in reverse. Small groups are entering gray zones, establishing footholds, and waiting for reinforcements. Ukraine didn't wait. It counterattacked before Russia could consolidate. Now here's where it gets interesting. Around Kostiantynivka, Ukrainian forces repelled infiltrations through targeted counterattacks. Geolocated imagery confirmed Ukrainian advances in eastern and southeastern sectors. Russian sources reported control over these areas. Independent verification showed contested zones changing hands multiple times within days. This isn't a secondary front. Kostiantynivka is the southern gateway to Sloviansk and Kramatorsk. It's the hinge point of Ukraine's entire defensive architecture in southern Donetsk. If it falls, the entire urban area Russia has targeted since 2022 comes under pressure from multiple directions. Defense analyst Denis Popovich assessed, "This area has been fortified since 2014. The enemy could advance, but the cost-benefit ratio is extremely unfavorable for the attacking side." Around Lyman, Ukrainian forces applied pressure on the flanks and held the line. Russian forward movement stopped. Several positions were recaptured. Near Huliaipol and Zaporizhzhia, Russia concentrated forces along a narrow 15-kilometer front, aiming to establish a bridgehead for a larger assault toward Zaporizhzhia city. According to strategic analyst Pavlo, Russian forces formed 2 narrow salients but failed to expand them. Ukraine targeted the flanks, trapping Russian units in corridors they couldn't widen or reinforce without taking unsustainable losses. Around Pokrovsk, gray zones were cleared through local counterattacks. Russian infiltrations were repelled. The pattern repeated. But this raises a question. If Russia is launching 200 operations per day and deploying experienced units, why is the advance rate declining? That's where the structural factors come in. And they're not isolated problems. They're a cascade. In February 2026, restrictions on Starlink terminal usage in occupied territories disrupted Russian tactical communications. Drone video feeds were severed. Small units lost contact with adjacent units. Navigation reverted to paper maps in an era of real-time drone warfare. Simultaneously, restrictions on Telegram usage affected horizontal communication. Telegram had become an operational tool. Officers shared orders through it. Coordinates were transmitted, and intelligence moved in real time. The restrictions disrupted that network. ISW's assessment: without stable communication infrastructure, coordinating complex offensive operations becomes significantly more difficult. The winter of 2025-2026 was colder and wetter than the previous year. The spring thaw produced Rasputitsa, the mud season. Armored units faced severe mobility constraints. Mechanized assault capability dropped significantly during the precise window when Russia had planned its coordinated push across multiple sectors. Journalist Pavlo Kazarin reported recruitment rates dropped 20% compared to the same period 1 year earlier. In Q1 2026, Russia recruited approximately 70,000 soldiers against a stated target of 90,000. This occurred despite signing bonuses reaching $30,000 to $50,000 in some regions. The financial incentives are increasing while recruitment numbers decline. According to open-source estimates cross-referenced with Ukrainian military reporting, reported losses appear to be outpacing recruitment. The gap isn't stable. It appears to be growing monthly. As armored vehicle stocks depleted, Russia shifted toward an infantry-heavy operational model. Units advancing on motorcycles and ATVs across open terrain against Ukraine's drone network face significant attrition. In the third week of April alone, according to Ukrainian General Staff figures, Russia reportedly suffered approximately 7,180 personnel losses for 41 square kilometers gained. Independent observers note this ratio has not improved over recent months. Now this is where it compounds. These four factors don't exist in isolation. They form a feedback loop. Without communication, coordination suffers. Without coordination, combined arms maneuvers become difficult. Without armored support, infantry faces greater exposure. Higher attrition deepens personnel challenges. Personnel challenges under bonus inflation create budget pressure. And budget pressure is already substantial. Russia's defense spending in 2025 reached $186 billion, over 7% of GDP. That's approaching levels not seen since the Soviet era, occurring against a backdrop of elevated inflation, interest rates above 20%, and a reported skilled labor shortage of 4.8 million workers. This creates a resource allocation dilemma. As Russia directs resources to Donbass operations, other sectors face constraints. As resources shift to secure Crimea, the Donbass front experiences gaps. Russia appears to lack sufficient capacity to maintain maximum pressure across all strategic axes simultaneously. Every resource decision on one front creates a vulnerability elsewhere. Here's what that looks like in operational data. Russia's daily territorial advance rate was nearly 10 square kilometers per day at the start of 2025. By April 2026, that had dropped below 3 square kilometers per day, a slowdown of more than threefold. Critically, this slowdown occurred despite sustained operational tempo. Russia maintained attack frequency. The decline in territorial gains happened alongside consistent or increased resource expenditure, not reduced effort. This has economic spillover effects. Energy markets have shown volatility tied to conflict developments. Global supply chains for certain commodities remain disrupted. The longer the operational tempo remains high while territorial gains slow, the greater the strain on Russia's fiscal position. So what's the response? It's not adjusting operational strategy, it's adjusting the narrative framework. The mechanism works like this. Russian forces send small units into gray zones between Ukrainian positions. These units don't establish sustained control. They can't maintain defensive lines. They can't secure logistics. Reinforcement requires crossing terrain under constant Ukrainian drone surveillance. But they can be reported as territorial gains. Russian Ministry of Defense announcements frequently report captured settlements. Independent geolocated imagery analysis categorizes most of these as contested gray areas, not controlled territory. Many announced captures represent positions where Russian forces maintain presence for days, not weeks. Ukraine's operational response goes beyond defensive posture. By 2026, approximately 600 square kilometers had been recaptured, according to aggregated open-source mapping. Robotic ground systems are clearing positions with reduced personnel risk. Interceptor drones are reportedly achieving high interception rates against certain Russian strike systems in some sectors. Precision strikes at medium range systematically target logistics infrastructure, ammunition depots, command posts, fuel storage, and supply routes. This forces Russia to allocate defensive resources to positions originally planned as offensive staging areas. That disrupts the operational planning cycle. But here's the strategic question. Can Russia sustain this operational tempo through summer? Former Ukrainian intelligence official Kirill Budanov assessed that full occupation of Donbass would require between 300,000 and 1 million soldiers. That's not speculation. That's the current cost per kilometer extrapolated to Russia's stated territorial objective. Analyst Oleksandr Kovalenko outlines the likely priority sectors for May and June. Huliipol represents the primary offensive focus. Russia's objective is to encircle Orikhiv and advance westward from behind Ukraine's fortified defensive line. The broader goal is establishing conditions for a future operation targeting Zaporizhzhia city. Kovalenko assesses this as the axis most likely to see intensified activity. Kostiantynivka represents the highest risk scenario. Russia will likely attempt entry through industrial and southern districts using infiltration tactics similar to those employed in Bakhmut. Small groups infiltrate civilian structures, establish positions, and await reinforcement. Ukraine's drone coverage and robotic systems are making this significantly more costly than previous urban operations. Pokrovsk will likely remain stalemated. Russia has formed two narrow salients but failed to expand them. Ukraine's sustained flank pressure prevents widening. Sloviansk-Kramatorsk. Analyst Popovich's assessment is direct. Russia has stated intent to capture this urban area by the end of summer 2026. Given current advance rates and reported attrition, achieving this goal appears highly unlikely within that time frame. There's also gradual pressure along the border in the Sumy, Kharkiv, and potentially Chernihiv regions. Russia is systematically probing defenses, testing response times. Maintaining maximum defensive strength at every border point simultaneously presents operational challenges. President Zelensky noted certain activity along the Belarusian border as well. Small-scale provocations remain possible, though any significant cross-border operation would carry substantial costs for Belarus. Now let's zoom out. What does this mean beyond the immediate battlefield? Economically, the conflict is consuming resources Russia cannot easily replace at current rates. A defense budget exceeding 7% of GDP, elevated inflation, deepening labor shortages. These are characteristics of a mobilized economy that can function short-term, but accumulate structural costs over time. Energy markets remain sensitive to developments. Disruptions to Russian refinery capacity have contributed to regional price volatility. Global grain markets, while stabilized compared to 2022, still factor in Black Sea security assessments. Politically, the gap between claimed territorial advances and verified territorial control creates domestic information management challenges. Russian military bloggers have increasingly criticized tactical execution, adequacy of equipment, and loss rates, even within the constraints of domestic information controls. International humanitarian organizations, including UN-affiliated bodies, continue documenting displacement patterns. Civilian infrastructure damage in contested areas affects reconstruction cost projections, which multiple European governments are already factoring into long-term fiscal planning. Ukraine's strategy operates on a specific timing calculation. It's not passive attrition, simply waiting for resource exhaustion. It's actively increasing costs across every operational dimension simultaneously. Targeting energy infrastructure, degrading communication networks, raising the resource cost per kilometer, maintaining international pressure that sustains economic constraints. The objective is shaping decision-making within Moscow by making the current operational approach appear unsustainable. That perception shift hasn't occurred at the leadership level yet, but a net territorial loss of 116 square kilometers in a single month, a four-fold decline in daily advance rates, reported attrition of approximately 7,480 personnel per 41 square kilometers gained, and failure to achieve first-phase objectives of the spring offensive. These aren't isolated anomalies. They represent accumulating pressure on operational capacity. Kovalenko's assessment frames what that means. These results are inconsistent with a large-scale offensive breakthrough. Ukrainian forces have not achieved a decisive operational breakthrough capable of triggering broad front collapse. Ukraine does not appear to possess resources for an immediate large-scale counteroffensive, but sustained attrition may not require one. The strategy produces measurable, documented, geolocated results. systematically depleting available reserves, increasing cost per operation, forcing defensive resource allocation where offensive operations were planned. Kovalenko's forecast for coming months. Operations will likely focus on shaping conditions for a future inflection point rather than producing that inflection immediately. Such an inflection could emerge toward the end of 2026 or into 2027. A decisive breakthrough has not materialized, but the current stagnation is becoming increasingly apparent. If you want continuous coverage of how this develops, subscribe and turn on notifications. We'll track Ukraine's operational strategy, Russia's resource constraints, and whether spring 2026's stagnation becomes something larger by summer. Leave your analysis in the comments. Do you think Russia has the capacity to sustain meaningful offensive operations through summer 2026? Or has the stagnation become structurally embedded?